let's look at our pattern guide sheet to see what comes next. We've just attached the pocket, and it looks like the next thing on here, it says, transfer buttonhole placements to the front. Fuse small pieces of fusible interfacing to wrong side of front under placement of buttonholes. Make the buttonholes. So we're going to break this down into a few parts. The first thing we're going to do is transfer the buttonhole placements to the front. We've marked it on the back. If your markings came off, you can always pull out your pattern piece again. So this is pattern piece number 1 that we used for the front, and you can just remark them. So if they're missing, you can remark them, and you can just mark it on the front this time instead of the back. But we're going to move it to the front, and then we're going to put some interfacing on the back. And the interfacing, that's where we're going to pull in this little 4x3 piece that we did, and we're going to cut it in half, and we'll use a little bit for that. And that's just going to help make it our fabric a little bit more stable and thick as we sew the buttonholes. After we do that, we will make the buttonholes. So let's start with the first step where we're just transferring the buttonhole markings. So if I fold this up, you can see my 2 eyes where I put the eye brackets, where I put the buttonhole markings on the back, and I'm going to transfer that to the front. I want this to not be super permanent as I move it to the front because you will see the front of my hoodie. So if I make it a really permanent thing, it's going to be stuck there. But I do need to at least know where they're going to be. So I'm going to put a pin at the top of my eye and at the bottom of my eye, and that will mark, and I'm going vertically through as I do that. I'm going to also mark over here. Sorry if you hear people in the hall. We're just changing classes right now. And down there. And once I flip that over, they should be marked pretty good. I can lay that out and just see. I'm going to just pull it off to the side. I put it through vertically, but right now I'm just going to pull off to the side. They should be pretty straight up and down. I can fix it if I need to. And then they should be like pretty the same distance from the bottom of my pocket and from the bottom of my fabric. You want to make sure that you still have at least 1 inch down here at the bottom, because at the end we're going to fold this over 1 inch and sew. So we need to make sure that there's 1 inch to be folded and sewn. And you're like when we sew up here for the 1 inch that we fold under for our hem, we want these buttonholes to be kind of framed right in the middle of that, so we can make a casing for our drawstring to go in. So if they're not 1 inch, just move it up just a little bit so it is 1 inch right here that we can fold under. To transfer the markings, I'm just going to do a little dot on the front. And I don't want to make it too big or noticeable because this is the front of my fabric. Remember, when I use this is a water-soluble pen, so that means with water it will come out. But sometimes not everything comes out, especially if you have like white fabric. So I'm just going to do a little dot there on each of those. And hopefully you can see them. Some of them you can probably see better than others. And then I can remove my pins. And I'm just going to use these dots for a placeholder for a second. I'll put something that's a little easier and more visible to see after I put my interfacing on. But this is just for the moment to hold that in place. Let's talk about the interfacing. So I have this piece right here, and I'm just going to cut it like so, just kind of in half. And then I'll cut it in half again. So I've cut my little piece into about quarters. So I don't actually need this other half. This is just extra for right now. But I'm going to go over to the iron and I'm going to press these on the other side. So this is the right side of my fabric. I don't want to press them to the right side of my fabric. I'm going to press them to the wrong side of my fabric, like so, over at the iron. And that will just help make my fabric a little more stable because it is kind of a stretchy fabric. It'll make it less stretchy at these points, and I'll make it a little more stable as I sew the buttonhole. Let's head over to the iron. I'm over at the iron and I'm looking at the wrong side of my hoodie front. So you can see the outlines of where my pocket is attached, but you can't actually see the pocket because I'm looking at the wrong side. And down here, you can faintly see my eyes for the buttonholes. And I have my 2 pieces of interfacing that I just cut. So I had my big rectangle and I cut it into quarters. I'm going to take 2 of those pieces and I'm going to press them on here. I might even trim them down a little bit as I go because you can see this eye faintly. That's where my first buttonhole is going to be. And I'm going to line up the top with this bottom seam of my hoodie because I know that my buttonhole doesn't even start till here. So that'll give me a nice 1/2 inch buffer. And I'm going to just trim this to be a little bit shorter, taking off about 3/8 of an inch there so that I'm not going off the edge of my hoodie, because when I press this, there's glue on one side and not glue on the other side. But I don't want the glue to go down onto the ironing board because that would ruin the ironing board and make it so that it would get glue on other people's projects. So I'm going to trim both of these just a little bit more. And then I'll find my other buttonhole, which is faintly right here. You can see that. Again, if you're missing your buttonhole measurements or if they came off over time, you can always pull out your pattern piece again. And this is pattern piece number 1, and you can mark those buttonholes again. When I press this, I'm going to make sure that the side with the dots, the rough side with the dots is down. I'm lining it up with the bottom of the pocket. And then again, I'm making sure that the rough side is down. And I'm putting this over where my buttonholes are. Then I'm going to use this press cloth, which is just a piece of fabric that I can use to protect my iron and my fabric. And I'm going to use that when I do interfacing because there is glue in the interfacing that I'm activating, and I don't want that glue to get onto my iron. So I'm going to put this over the top, and I'm going to just spray a little water because interfacing requires a little bit of water to activate the glue. It requires water, heat, and pressure. So then I'll take my iron and use that to provide the heat and pressure, just going kind of up and down, pressing motion. I'll make sure that my iron is not on the cotton setting. I want it to be on the silk or synthetic setting. You can see there's a little arrow. I don't know if you can see. There's a little arrow that points where it is. So I don't want it on cotton because that can melt my fabric. Or scorch it at least, which could change the color and make the texture a little bit rougher. So I'm going to do that, just test to see. It looks like my interfacing is staying on pretty good. So my interfacing is ready to go. And I just need to finish marking the front of my fabric so that's ready, and then I can sew my buttonholes.